Hello, so I am the Cosplay Pantry, your resident cosplayer here. So today we will be teaching you how to make your own Aerith costume from the new Final Fantasy VII Remake. So for making your Aerith costume, I recommend that I would say it's a good beginner costume if you're following along, but there is going to be certain techniques that may be sort of harder if you are a little bit new. So for this costume, the first thing we're going to do is make the pattern. The skirt is decently easy, it's just a normal, boring, plain circle skirt, so really easy to begin with. But the harder part will be her bodice, because you'll have cup inserts around the bust, and then some button facings as well. I will say that the buttons are not going to be practical in this costume. I'm going to be making these just decorative and probably have a zip in the back just for ease, just because zips are much easier than buttons, and buttonholes are kind of a pain, so it's sort of preference. If you do want to make obviously a real button front, then you can do that quite easily, but mine will in fact be fake. So the first thing I'm going to do for this costume is I'm going to be making the pattern for the top. I've done several different trials in making the pattern for this top, and none of them I've liked. So I tried altering this a plain pattern like on paper, so just doing it by maths, and that didn't really yield the results I wanted, because I was having trouble getting the bust cup to sit how I liked, so it kept being either too big or too small, and it was just really fiddly, and it wasn't really working for me. I mean, if you're good at that sort of thing, I'm really bad pattern cutter, to be honest, I'm really bad at it. So I like to take the easier approach, or pretty much stick to the pattern, because I'm not comfortable doing a lot of pattern cutting. I know the basics, I know how to do basic patterns, I'm fine with those sort of things. Putting in darts I can do, and those sorts of things.
So the first thing I do to start off making the pattern for Aerith, I start by covering my entire torso in cling film. This method is pretty popular in the cosplay communities. There are lots of tutorials you can follow. Just cover myself in cling film. Quite difficult to do on your own, so I definitely recommend having a friend or a family member help you, but I was alone, so you can see I'm sort of struggling. Definitely don't recommend that one. After I've done the cling film around my body, I can draw on the design I want for my pattern. Something to be aware of when you're doing this for yourself is it will make the pattern slightly smaller, so you need to account for that later on during the pattern cutting stage. It will be smaller because when you wrap the cling film around yourself, it will sort of compress everything and make it smaller and tighter than you want, and not as comfortable as you want. So that's just something to be aware of. So if you have a friend, you'll be able to do a much better job than I'm currently doing. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear any of my breath or sort of the boops in my voice, and that's because I'm using a headset microphone because I don't have anything else, so I'm really sorry. That it bugs me as much as it probably bugs you. So next, once we have drawn on the design onto the duct tape and cling film sort of combination, I then cut out the design that I've drawn. As you can see, I just closely followed the reference image, drew on the bust cup and some of the extra things I need to add, like the extra length at the bottom. I also add in the dart in the bust. It won't lay properly unless it has a dart. I placed the dart in such a way that it would be invisible when I wore the jacket. At least that was sort of the plan. It ended up not really working that way, but that was sort of the idea as well. And I didn't include the straps at this point. There's also the back piece, which I also cut out.
So I am now going to show you what I do after I do the initial sort of, what's the word? This. So this will be the front piece. So basically what I'm going to do is transfer them to this pattern paper so that I can start sort of figuring out what my final pattern's going to look like. I really don't have an ideal camera setup for this, so I'm hoping it'll still be okay.
So here I am getting ready to start the paper pattern part of the process. I'm just drawing around all of the different pieces that we got from doing our duct tape and cling film method. So I draw around the bust, the front bodice, and then I'm also just straightening up all the lines here so it's easier and neater for myself. And I'm also adding that extra length I needed to add for the bottom of the front bodice. I added the seam allowance on the inside for reasons I genuinely cannot remember right now. I have literally no idea why I did that. I'm sure it made sense at the time, but I couldn't tell you why I did it now, which is super unhelpful. I also then do the back portion. I just measure half of it because it wasn't a very straight line, so I just decided to go on the measurements it gave me rather than the necessary sort of shape it gave me, like I did with the front part. And then I also add the extra measurements on the bottom of the back. I also knew I was going to have a zip down the middle, so I didn't need to have a full piece, it could be in 2 halves. And then I label everything to make sure I know which part's which, and I'm now adding the centimetre seam allowance to the bust cup. Just adding the centimetre to the back now. And then I cut out the pieces. This is obviously pretty explanatory. You can just watch me do that. So here I am using some scrapped fabric from actually the old Veronica mock-up I did. If any of you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you might have seen that one. So this is just the old fabric from that one, because it's always good to recycle fabric. I just fold it in half because some of the pieces that I will be cutting out for the mock-up are in fact folded in half. I realise now that I didn't really need to do this because we'll have a zip in the back anyway, so it doesn't need to be cut on the fold, so you can ignore me doing this. I'm doing this incorrectly. I also add a little bit extra on the sides just because I was worried about the garment not fitting me, and I'd rather have too much than not enough because it's much easier to take away fabric than it is to add it on. And this one isn't on the edge because obviously it's not going to be cut on the fold.
I'm just making a little vloggy type thing, just to sort of show the process I've made. So just ignore how badly I have sewn this cup in. I've sewn it in so badly. Don't do as I say, not as I do. Okay? But this is looking really nice so far. But as you can probably see, it is way too long. I don't know how I messed up that badly. But I did. But this is why we do mock-ups. Because I mess up. Because I am only human. So I mess up sometimes. And I'm a pretty experienced cosplayer. I'm in like my 5th year of cosplay, so if you're a beginner and you make mistakes, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. It happens. And that's cool. You learn. You live. So yeah, anyway, so it's too long. But the cup wasn't quite fitting right, so to rectify that, I added... I've basically, if you can see, you can see what I look like. But you can basically see how I've basically made it a much bigger dart at the base and kept the bottom, basically. So I just added some additional shaping to the top of the cup, and then it fits really well. So nice. But this pattern has to be pretty spot on because I'm doing a lining, and if it's a little bit off, it sort of makes the whole thing janky. So yeah. Anyway, I'm going to continue, and then I'm probably going to like come back and tell you how I fix the problems. Because no doubt there will be more. So I'm probably not going to actually film me sewing the bodice because there's a lot of this is like trial and error and stuff like that. So it's not particularly helpful from a tutorial point of view. Okay? Nice. Nice talk.
So here I am wearing the mock-up. As you can see, it's a little bit too big, as I discussed earlier, so I'm just simply putting pins in the sides of the seams so that it will be smaller and better fitting. This is part of just doing the mock-up process. It's a lot of trial and error, I'm afraid, when it comes to making your own pattern. And I'm also having a look at the back and seeing the length, and it's a little bit too long on me, so I make a mental note to myself just to take away some of the length at the back as well.
Hello everybody, here is my progress on my mock-up. So I trimmed this so it's not as baggy. I didn't do a very good job though because for some reason the back is longer than the front. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but so far looking really good, I think. And it fits much better, so the only thing I need to do is measure this so I can add straps and add the little channel that will go in the bottom where she threads her ribbon through. So almost there. The pattern cutting stage is almost over, so I'm now gonna take apart all this and then make my patterns from this.
Getting on to the final part of the pattern drafting phase, I am now putting all the pieces of my mock-up onto the pattern paper. And just a little side note, you don't actually need pattern paper to do this. You can use normal paper if that's the only thing you have, wrapping paper I've seen people use, and a couple of years ago before I had pattern paper I used to use newspaper, and I found that was a really good substitute to the more expensive pattern paper because it's just as thin, it's flexible, it's cheap, it's large. The biggest thing I think is it being large because you don't want all your patterns to be sellotaped together because I find it gets a bit messy personally, but that's just personal preference. So as you can see here, I am drawing around all of the fabric pieces from my mock-up, the front, the bust and the back piece, and including the dart as well, very important. And when I draw around these pieces I always tend to do like a dotted line rather than a straight line because I like to go in later and neaten them up. So here I am measuring. I'm honestly not sure what I'm measuring, probably the width I imagine because it was so long ago since I did this. I didn't do a mock-up for these parts because I knew I could just use my measurements. I just needed my waist measurements and how wide I wanted it. So it was basically just a strip around the whole of the body. I think I ended up changing it a little bit during the actual construction, but that happens sometimes. It's not always exactly what you plan, and when you make things sometimes you have to make on-the-spot decisions that you don't know. That's why in industry they tend to make several mock-ups before making the pattern and sending it off to factories, just because of stuff like this. Obviously we're not doing that because we're only making one Aerith costume, and I'm teaching you how I made my Aerith costume. So you see I'm just neating it up and adding seam allowance where I need to. And I believe this is the waist bit. It's either the waist bit or the straps. They're honestly very similar in length and in shape. They're basically just two rectangles. So it looks like I'm neating everything up and making sure it's all nice and straight lines so it's easier and more accurate when I cut it out. I actually really hate pattern cutting, and it's an important skill to have, but anytime I can avoid pattern cutting or altering patterns, I absolutely do that. I hate pattern cutting and it's not even like I'm particularly new to it. I don't like it and I find it difficult because it's a very mathematical, logical thing. If you're more of a technical person, I think it's probably quite good, but as someone who is a much more confident seamstress than I am a pattern cutter, I don't particularly enjoy it. This is a side note, but in recent years I've really been enjoying hand sewing. I love doing hand stitching, and I'm gonna try and get more into historical reconstruction stuff as well. But I mean, you guys will see that in other videos, so if that's something that interests you, you should definitely like and subscribe.
So here I have my final pattern pieces. So I basically made the little adjustments I needed to. So taking a bit off here. Hopefully that should make it shorter. Taking a centimetre off here. So I've got my front, my bust piece, my back, the ribbon channel, I'm going to have 2 of those, and the strap. So, woohoo!